Good morning. My name is Andy Zalecki, and on behalf of my HBS colleagues, I want to warmly welcome all of you to Perspectives on the COVID-19 Pandemic, Assessing the Challenge and Making a Difference. We're so delighted that our audience today includes MBA and doctoral students, staff and faculty, alumni tuning in from all over the world, and also the most recent group of new admits to our MBA program. Folks who haven't yet matriculated, but we sincerely hope you'll be joining us as RCs this fall. Welcome to all. We hope that at this difficult time, all of you and your families and loved ones are staying healthy and navigating this situation well, and even finding new ways to thrive. A few words about the genesis of this day. 6 weeks ago, we made the painful decision to cancel this year's Field Global Immersion, or FGI. Since 2011, FGI has been a key part of the first-year curriculum, an opportunity for our first-year students to work with local companies on 4 continents. Our RCs have been excitedly looking forward to their May 2020 immersions. COVID-19 derailed those plans. Of course, it's changed everybody's plans. With COVID-19 top of mind on our campus, we decided to put together today's program with our RCs foremost in mind, and with 2 primary goals for content. We wanted to help our students better understand the COVID-19 challenge in its various dimensions. And with our school's mission always in mind, we wanted our students and the rest of our community to hear from and be inspired by business leaders making a significant difference in this fight. And so we're thrilled to have this spectacular lineup today. Our first and final sessions are with prominent business leaders who saw in crisis not just the opportunity, but the duty for business to go above and beyond in creating value. Value not focused solely on shareholders, but especially in this emergency, on the societies in which business is embedded. We open with Ken Chenault, known to all of you as one of America's most celebrated CEOs of his generation. And we close with Revathi Advaithi, CEO of global manufacturing heavyweight Flex. Business is periodically called on by academics, politicians, sometimes by prominent business people to elevate its game as corporate citizen. These calls don't always have tangible impact. Something different, though, seems to be happening now. Businesses are stepping out of their usual lanes to help out in very tangible ways in the fight against COVID-19. And Ken and Revathi have prominent roles in this. In between Ken's and Revathi's sessions, we'll hear from 4 of Harvard University's brightest lights. Ashish Jha, a leading authority on public health and policy interventions. Juliette Kayyem, who as a senior federal and state Homeland Security official helped keep us safe from threats from terrorism to pandemics. And then 2 of our most renowned economists with expertise on financial crises and on globalization, Carmen Reinhart and Donnie Roderick. These 4 scholars and public intellectuals will help all of us interpret the COVID-19 challenge to health, to jobs, to our national economies, to globalization, to the way we live, and help us think about what may lie ahead and what should lie ahead. With our guests having so much on their plates these days, we're especially grateful that they made the time to be with us today, and grateful as well to our HBS colleagues, experts in their own rights, who stepped forward to moderate these conversations. 3 quick admin points, and then we'll go. We're recording this program, and it'll be made available to you in a few days. So if 7 hours of Zoom webinar in one sitting is too much for you, we get it, but please do come back to the recording and watch all the sessions. Second, our love extends to every member of our community, including everyone attending today. But having designed this program specifically for the RCs, we'll respectfully ask that non-RCs please refrain from raising your hand on Zoom during the Q&A with our speakers. Let's all agree to leave that Q&A opportunity to our RCs. We appreciate your understanding on that. Last point, if you have tech difficulty, please log out and then log back in. That should cure the problem. All right, our keynote session featuring Ken Chenault in dialogue with Karen Mills begins promptly at 9:15, but we're going to start half a minute early. So back to you in 10 seconds. 3 seconds, that is. Welcome to our first session, The Business Community's Opportunity to Step Up Collectively, featuring Ken Chenault, Chairman of General Catalyst and formerly Chairman and CEO of American Express. Our moderator is HBS Professor Karen Mills, who formerly headed the U.S. Small Business Administration. Over to you, Karen.
Organizers at HBS. This is actually an incredible lineup. So good morning, HBS students. Good morning, Section I miss you, but I'll see you next week. Today, we have the great pleasure of having Ken Chenault with us. Ken is not an HBS grad. He's a Harvard Law School grad and a Bowdoin College grad, but he has two sons who have come to HBS. One is right now with us at HBS. So as an HBS parent and also as a Harvard Corporation member, he is very loyal and very involved in the school. So welcome, Ken. And I'm going to start out with a story about when I first got to know you and your leadership more than 10 years ago, when I was running the Small Business Administration. You were running American Express, and you developed really a movement that was called Small Business Saturday. And you came to us after about a year when it had gained a little bit of momentum. And you said, you know what? We want to let this thing go out of the umbrella of American Express and have it be for all small businesses. We want to not make sure that everybody has to use an Amex card to make their purchase. We want to have it belong to small businesses. Will you help us? And we got together, and now of the very few small business brands out there, Small Business Saturday has a life of its own. I was in the UK, and they have Small Business Saturday, even though they don't have Thanksgiving. So I got to know your style, which I would characterize as do the right thing and the rewards will follow. So here we are with COVID-19. Can you talk about your leadership style in this moment and how you see doing the right thing manifesting itself today?
Thanks, Karen. Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and it's always terrific to be with you and to be at HBS. And I do want to give a shout out to my son, Kevin, who's in Section C, but really everyone at Harvard Business School, connected with Harvard Business School. This is really a horrific time that we're in. And to just talk a little bit about Small Business Saturday, and I know we'll get into COVID-19, the reality for me of my leadership philosophy, I think it starts with your personal values and beliefs. And as you know, Karen, I'm a child of the 60s and the 70s, having gone through the civil rights movement, the Vietnam era. And I was not someone who had as my aspiration growing up that I would be CEO of a Fortune 100 company. In fact, I had zero interest in business. I wanted to save the world, and that was my focus. But I think what I've carried is this mission that I want to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. I do believe that business companies have a social and moral obligation. And so with respect to Small Business Saturday, as you know, the focus was how do we dramatically improve small business? And when we thought about it and came to you, what became clear to me is we had to put the singular interests of American Express, we had to put that on the back burner and really say, what would it take to dramatically change small business? And what we wanted to do was to highlight not against big box retailers, but in fact to say small businesses are core to our economy. We need to have local communities support small business. And so we decided, and it was frankly controversial inside the company, that we would allow any type of payment product, cash, checks, as much as I hate to say it, MasterCard and Visa, they could use any type of product as long as they supported small business. And that, I think, had a major impact and demonstrated to me the collective power of business bringing about real change.
You know, we're going to talk about what you're doing now in big business, but I want to turn to government for a second. I happen to know that you were offered by President Obama any number of major cabinet roles, and you said no to all of them. But at this moment, let's imagine that you had said yes, or that you were in charge. And Penny Pritzker, who's on the Harvard Corporation with us, was the Secretary of Commerce. And she said the other day, you know, if we were in there right now, President Obama would stick us in the cabinet room and he'd assign jobs, and commerce would get the supply chain. So let's imagine that you are in charge of America's supply chain and all of its businesses. What do you think government should be doing to get some of the things that we need in this country moving? And what have you been doing outside of government in recognition of the fact that the supply chain needed some help?
I think, first of all, what's very important in any crisis is one, you have to demonstrate a level of decisiveness. And for me, you know, my leadership mantra is the role of a leader is to define reality and give hope. We live in incredibly uncertain times, but part of what the leadership needs to do is, in fact, to demonstrate to people that they understand some of the levers that could help bring about improvement. And so I think one of the roles, whether it's the president, whether it's a governor, whether it's a mayor, is you need to coalesce different organizations and people against some key actions. So if we go to the supply chain, I think what's very, very important there is, one, we've got to have a framework to manage supply and demand. How do we set priorities? And this is not just a technical issue. This is a hope issue for the populace, that if people understood what's the reality on supply, here are the steps we're taking to, in fact, improve the supply, here are the demand issues that we're facing, and we're actually going to prioritize. That's important from an efficiency standpoint to get the right products and services to the right people, but it also gives people hope that, in fact, someone is analyzing these issues and
Now,
taking.
You took this on, Ken, and tell us what you did with Ventilator Supply.
Sure. So let me back up, because I believe, obviously, in a time of crisis, and I'm a firm believer in this, no matter what your level, no matter what your role, no matter whether you are officially sanctioned or not, everyone can take a leadership role. And so literally, I think it was around 18 days ago, we put together a group. And when I say we, my co-founder is a person by the name of Rachel Carlson, who's the founder of a company called Guild Education that is focused on workforce education. And we were talking about the need for the business community to, in fact, take a collective response, but also from a prioritization standpoint, what were areas that we thought a fast, agile group could make a real difference. And so we picked 3 areas, and we took a startup mentality to this. We said what we want to be is we want to be catalysts to bring about change. Another criteria was, let's keep the recognition level of ourselves very low because we want to really be supportive and drive change, but not be the individuals out front. And what we did was we said there are three areas we think we could have an impact. One was to increase the supply and distribution of ventilators. Second was PPE. And third was testing and diagnostics. So what we did was I made a call to Mary Barra and suggested that she think about repurposing her plant. Mary is an unbelievable patriot and I think a real hero in this. She immediately said, I think that's a good idea. In 2 hours, we connected her to a ventilator manufacturer. And literally in 48 hours, Mary said, I think I'm going to do this. We then got some other manufacturers involved and both ventilator manufacturers and companies that would repurpose plants. And we did the same thing with PPE. And what we saw was there was a need, in fact, to catalyze people against an objective. There was a need to connect people. But once we were able to connect people, we played a supportive role and we let people like Mary lead, which she's done a terrific job in doing.
So this is happening all across a set of efforts where you've galvanized a bunch of CEOs to move together and solve critical problems. What do you think today, as you look at the Business Roundtable and other leadership, what do you wish they were doing more of? Where do you think maybe they need another boost, perhaps to help their employees to do some other things that are pressing in the crisis?
Yeah, so I would say a few things, Karen. One is, obviously, this crisis is unprecedented. Having navigated through 9/11, navigated through the financial crisis, there is frankly not a comparison. I really think this is 9/11 plus the financial crisis, a multiple of 2 or 3. So it's incredible. So the individual companies are facing tremendous challenges. I think I see a number of CEOs stepping up, but what I would like to see even more was this collective focus against priorities. I'd like to see even more partnerships being developed, because I'm a believer in business and in crises, is when you're facing unprecedented times, positively or in a negative way, what you have to do is you have to transform. And so the way we operate as companies, we can't operate the same way as we did pre-crisis. We have to fundamentally change. So I'd like to see more innovation around partnerships on the part of corporations. And I think what we also are starting to see even more of is corporations recognizing, and I see some positive signs, that they've got to make some very important changes for our society overall, because what COVID-19 has put in even more stark relief are the disparities that exist in our society.
Yeah, say some more about that. If you had to hope for some lessons from corporate America for the future about these disparities, what would you, if you were, sort of in charge and could have a wish that all of corporate America would change a certain aspect of the way they do business and make an impact on this issue that we're facing on inequality, what might you suggest that corporate America do?
I think one, very clearly, there needs to be a very strong focus on education and training. So education at an early stage. So in the communities where companies are and around the world, being focused on education is very, very important. Workforce training. is absolutely essential. I am very passionate about it because I think we have not just an obligation, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity for companies to focus on training and education. So that would be a very, very strong priority. I think secondly is I think companies can focus on their own people more of what are the needs of people that are at the lower end of the income and salary at a company. What are they doing to retrain them? What are they doing from a healthcare standpoint? So I think that there are things that need to be done at the company that will very much address some of these issues. And then I think there are broader societal needs that companies need to address. And part of that is going to happen by private-public partnerships. It's also going to happen by companies partnering together. And one of the things that I don't want to champion what you and I did, Karen, but I do think it was novel to have a program that in fact has gone through changes in small business, but it wasn't an issue of a typical government company program. I think it was a very innovative partnership. So I think that those are things companies need to be more involved in.
Now, I want to turn to big tech and entrepreneurs because you left American Express and you had a lot of job opportunities. And what did you do? You became the chairman of General Catalyst, and you own all kinds of entrepreneurial companies. You went on the board of a bunch of the most famous big tech companies and are very active in Silicon Valley. So what should Silicon Valley be doing today and maybe in the future to use their technology to help us out of this crisis? Should we be tracking people? How do we think about technology and privacy? Where's the role of big tech?
So I think the big tech is an incredible enabler, but I think also needs to increasingly recognize the responsibility that it has to lead the change and to deal with the implications of people being left out. So big tech needs to be far more inclusive than it has been. And one of the points that I always make when I talk to big tech or little tech is if you want to disrupt the world, then the question is, what are you doing to change the world? And if you are simply accepting the status quo, that is not being disruptive in all aspects of your life. And you need to, in fact, be disruptive. You need to bring about change, but you have a responsibility to advance society. One of the reasons why I decided to be very involved in technology is, one, I love technology. But second, what I believe is that technology is just a great enabler. And technology needs not just to bring about innovation, but they need to bring about real change that is going to dramatically improve people's station in our society.
I want to switch gears for cover something else, which is that you are a member of the Harvard Corporation, a terrific colleague there, but you are also the head of the finance committee for Harvard, for the corporation. Can you take us under the curtain a little bit and tell us how is Harvard positioned to face this great uncertainty? What is Harvard doing to come through this? And how do you feel about its position financially?
So look, I think every institution, every company is certainly dealing with, I would say, if not the biggest challenge, I think it's close to it, that they've ever faced in their history. And I think Harvard is in that situation. And when you're in a crisis, and I would start here, it really goes to understanding, what do you stand for? What do you believe? What's the mission? What are your objectives? So one I would say is, I think Harvard is very clear about what it stands for. I think very importantly, I think the overarching need that has to be addressed is the safety and health of everyone involved in Harvard, with Harvard. But I think that what I have been very encouraged and heartened by is both the approach that Harvard is taking and the leadership of Harvard. And I'm not saying this because I'm just a member of the Harvard Corporation. That's just not the way I operate. I think we're incredibly fortunate to have Larry Bacow. I think he's a person who has incredibly strong values. He is indeed an empathetic, decisive leader, which is what you need in a crisis. He will communicate transparently what reality is, but I think he's also someone who will communicate and demonstrate tangible reasons to be hopeful. And so here are some of the reasons, despite this unprecedented crisis, why I'm hopeful. I think we've got probably the most experienced, capable team of any university in the world. Again, Larry has gone through crises. He has those personal attributes. Alan Garber. Alan Garber is someone who he understands infectious diseases. He is an economist. He is a doctor. He has been very focused on these set of issues. Katie Lapp, the chief administrative officer, Katie could run a company, and she is absolutely incredible. So this team has developed a game plan. And as you know, Karen, one of the things that was started at the business school, I want to give a shout out to Nitin and Angela Christie, is the business school under Nitin's leadership developed a recession playbook that we have been focused on Harvard for several years. And so while no one could plan for this type of crisis, we've been able to build on this playbook. And I feel very good about the scenarios that we are working through. What I would also say, that one of the things I believe in a crisis is you have to set some key objectives. And one of the areas that we have set objectives so we can manage Harvard in a good way is, one, very practically, is stay liquid. That's an objective from a financial standpoint. You want to stay liquid. When American Express was going through the financial crisis, that was my first objective, stay liquid. Second was and is manage expenses to match declining revenues, but do it with setting strategic priorities. So that's the second important objective. And the third, and this gets to the hope part, is look for opportunities for very select strategic investments, understand what changes we may need to make to academic offerings, efficiency changes, but to look for opportunities. And so what I would emphasize is that Harvard has already taken some painful actions, will have to probably take more. But I really do think that everyone connected with Harvard should have confidence in our leadership and confidence that on a relative basis, Harvard is positioned well. But the reality is that painful actions will have to be taken. But what I believe is that we have a strategy, we have the criteria, we have the values. And I would just emphasize that given the incredibly challenging times we're in, we're very fortunate to have the leadership that we have at Harvard.
Yeah, I want to second that. And Ken, I want to thank you for the leadership. And I know you've mentioned also Tom Hollister, who's the head VP of Finance.
Tom is absolutely, he is someone, by the way, again, who is incredibly focused on doing what's right for Harvard. And he's really driven by the values of Harvard. And he's someone who has been battle tested, even though no one has faced a battle like we're facing now.
Yeah, this is a tremendous battle. And I will say that Harvard is thinking about its whole community. You know, I focus a lot on the small business piece, but I know that you brought up, you know, in all kinds of companies, but including Harvard, paying small businesses soon. Because as you mentioned, staying liquid is a priority now. As I tell my students, when you run out of cash, when you run out of money, you're dead. So we need to...
That's really, really important. But Karen, that was your idea. And I think it was a terrific idea to pay people forward so that if a small business has rendered a product or service, rather than pay them in 30, 45 days, pay them immediately. And you've been such a champion for small business and I will just say, Karen and I are still working together, trying to figure out ways to help small business as we go through COVID-19.
Yes, and thank you for that. So Andy, I think we probably have a lot of RC students who want to ask Ken a question, and Ken, I'll come back at the end for one last one of mine.
Mm-hmm.
Very good, Karen. If you've got a question and you're an RC, please click on the raise hand icon, bottom of your toolbar, and we'll set you up.
There you go.
Kaya.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Yep.
I'm not an RC, but I did have a question, so I seized the opportunity if you'll humor me.
Of course, go ahead.
My question was with reference to what you're talking about, getting the consortium of businesses to work together. The discussion about how partnership is really what's the force that can really amplify what you guys can do right now. I'm curious what you think is needed to bridge the gap in the large corporate world to build those partnerships. There's obviously early momentum and, you know, calling GM worked very well, but what do you think gets us from A to Z there? Because there's obviously so much left to do.
I think focus on some common objectives. Let's look at a few areas. One is return to work. A single company cannot decide on its own to return to work. So there are partnerships being created amongst companies figuring out what are the steps that need to be taken from a return to work standpoint. There are conversations going on right now between governors and mayors and businesses on what to do. I think the recently announced partnership with Google and Apple on tracing is an example. And so what I would emphasize is that there are different industry groups that are involved in bringing companies together. But I think what's also happening is companies on their own are coming together against common objectives. And frankly, I think the government, whether it's at the local level, state, or federal, can be both a convener and a facilitator of building relationships in the private sector. So I think there are a variety of pathways to drive partnerships. And what's important is in any crisis, what you do see it can be an accelerant for changes in positive behavior. And what I will tell you that I've seen in my 18 days that I've been very directly involved is a real acceleration and a willingness on the part of a range of companies to partner.
Question from Sunny Huang, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Great. So I was wondering, as entrepreneurs at HBS, what kind of lasting changes do you see extend beyond, this COVID-19 impact, that when we think about building businesses, we can help meet these needs and solve these problems and build businesses that have lasting impact?
Yeah, so I think what's very important for me is the mission for entrepreneurs. The mission statement, for example, for General Catalyst is, we want to invest in powerful, positive change that endures for our society and our entrepreneurs. And we are very focused, and I believe this strongly, is one of the things I ask entrepreneurs and founders is, are you building a company that will endure? And are you building a company that in fact is going to drive a social purpose as well as be a terrific business? And it's not an either or, because if we're really focused on doing what's best in the long term, then in fact we need a healthy and vibrant society. And so it's important to me that our entrepreneurs not just focus on what's a way for me simply to create a product that is going to be very attractive to a range of people, but is it going to be a product that will last? Will it be a product that will endure? Will it be a product that will have a positive impact on our society? So I think it's a choice, and an individual choice. We live in an open, free society, so no one is going to force you to do that. But the reality is that if you are starting a business, my view is start a business that means something. Start a business that's going to have an impact on the broader society, and build that in from the beginning. Don't say, well, I need to, in fact, first achieve success, and then I'm going to do some good things in the world. That's not the way I think you operate a company.
Let's take one from Nick Rosenbaum, please. Nick, please
thank
unmute.
you very much for sharing all those wonderful lessons from this crisis. My question is actually to jump off what you just said, which is, when you're thinking about building businesses, how to make them for the long term and for impact. So I think in a crisis, we see the best come out of people and we see amazing collective action. But how do we keep that collective action and make sure that businesses are still accountable to society after the crisis is done?
So I think what's very important, Nick, is you've got to go back to how you construct the mission of your company. Why are you doing this? I think you got to answer that question. What are the cultural and what are the values and what are the attributes that you want your company to stand for? So my view is, just as you should do personally, of saying, what do I believe? What do I stand for? What are my values? You need to do the same thing for your company, because a culture of a company is what really allows that company to endure. You obviously need a terrific strategy, you need great products, you need great services, you need very strong economics. But if you want to build a company that endures, you have to have an incredibly strong culture. And that culture needs to operate in good times and challenging times. And so focus on what you want the company to stand for, and make sure that as you are implementing your strategies, building your organization, you're reinforcing in very tangible ways the values of the company.
Brendan Lind, let's try you again.
Hey, my question is, as students, what should we be doing, and what do you think we can do to use this time where we have more free time? There's a whole bunch of us. What can we do to play a role and support in a time of crisis? And yeah, how would you recommend we get involved and actually make a difference?
So I think what I would recommend is there are organizations both directly involved in the crisis at the local level or national level that I would encourage you to get involved in. A number of these organizations need people with the types of skills that you have. That would be incredibly beneficial. I would also say that there are a range of organizations that you should understand if they are aligned with your interests, your values, they're making a difference in our society. But I'd really encourage you to get involved, because the reality is there are the immediate issues that we're dealing with respect to COVID-19 that you can play a major role. But some of the issues that Karen and I were talking about, income inequality, sustainability, there are a range of areas where having your involvement would make a difference. What I would also say is the way you conduct yourself and the involvement when you re-enter the workforce, I think it's going to be very important to exhibit what you stand for and what you believe, because there's nothing more impactful than impassioned people who care and are engaged.
Andy, let's take one last question, and then I want to take my moderator privileges and ask Ken one at the end.
Very good, Karen. Payal, please. You need to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I actually have been grateful to have Ken, because I work at American Express, and I did when he was my CEO, so I was extremely grateful to have him leading us. Ken, the question that I had for you is, what do you think are the key most important things a leader should be doing right now, and what are the key things that a leader should avoid to motivate people specifically during this time, because they're going through a lot personally themselves, and how do you sort of manage your business priorities with having that empathy as a leader?
Yeah, so I think what is very, very important, Payal, is this point that I've made of defining reality and giving hope. So one is to really be very transparent with people, the challenges and the situation as you know it, to be very clear about what is uncertain, what you don't know. And then also to be very clear about the actions that you can take to bring about improvements in the situation. I think secondly is the need to communicate and be very visible, because people need to have updates on a daily basis or several times a day, depending on the situation. So underlying the importance of being in touch with your people. Third is you've got to be decisive. You have to be willing to take action because you can't freeze. If you freeze, you fall back. And the reality of a crisis is that reputations are made or lost in a crisis. People are going to look and say, they may say, look, you're a nice person, but at the end of the day, you failed me. You did not act. You did not lead. So I think it's very important to put a set of actions together. But what is important when you implement those actions, be clear with people, here's what the company stands for. Here's what I will be guided by. This is going to be painful. And let me remind you of what the ultimate vision is of our institution or company. So I think what is critical in a crisis is what I think is essential in any leader is you have to exhibit integrity. And that means consistency of words and actions, because trust is very important, because you're going to be asking people to do things when they're highly anxious, when you don't know the full answer. And so what is important is you can't gain trust day one in a crisis. You have to have built trust leading into the crisis. But you can destroy that trust in a crisis if, in fact, you don't act decisively, you don't act with compassion, you don't act with integrity. And so those are some of the attributes and behaviors that I think are essential in a crisis.
Ken, thank you for that. And thanks for your leadership. I know that a lot of us are anxious, and I was particularly anxious about ventilators. And I had a conversation with you 18 days ago, and you said, I'm on it, and we're going to start making them. And I can't tell you how important that was to me personally, just to know that you had stepped up, that you had made that call to Mary Barrett. And I know you minimized it a little bit, but a lot of things took place because you decided you were going to exhibit leadership. Nobody said, this is your job, but you rose to that occasion and are doing many, many other things. So I want to ask you a question on behalf of the students. You know, this is a crisis and students are anxious. There's a whole set of ECs who are going to go out in the world. They don't know if they're going to have a job. There's a lot of people who feel they've missed out, you know, from, you know, field global immersion all the way down to, you know, just saying goodbye to their friends. And it feels in this moment like things are so difficult. You've talked about defining reality and giving hope. What advice can you give to students that recognizes this reality, but also says, maybe this is a memorable thing? I told some students, you will be closer to your section than any other section, the way people remember where they were in 9/11. You will be so connected to these people, even if you didn't say goodbye, even if you didn't have exactly those moments. So what advice do you give your students that might?
Sure, I will do that, Karen. Let me also just say, because I really do believe you share the credit is on Stop the Spread. I do want to just acknowledge and give a shout out to my co-founder, Rachel Carlson, who's been terrific as we have worked on this together. What I would say for me, Karen, just going back to different crises that I've faced personally or in business, clearly 9/11 emotionally was very, very difficult. American Express, we lost 11 of our colleagues, and the human suffering around the world was incredible. Obviously, what we're facing with COVID-19 is horrific. But I think to the point you made, that I would say this is a time where I would say to the students or anyone where you really want to take a gut check of who am I? What do I believe? What do I stand for? As we get through this fog, here are things that I'm going to focus on in my life. I'm going to make a difference in the world. And I'm going to use this period to fortify myself from a skills capability standpoint, to fortify myself from a character standpoint. I'm going to make a difference. I'm not going to take really anything for granted, because I think none of us could have imagined we would fully be in this type of situation. So one is, look at this as an opportunity to build on yourself. And as you know, one of my heroes is Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela was incarcerated for a good part of his life. And he, in fact, fortified himself in that period. So look at this as a time, as challenging as it is, that you're fortifying yourself to make a real change in the world. And then get engaged and involved now as well as later. And understand that the reality of the situation, I will tell you, is scary. But what I'm convinced of is we will get to the other side. But in getting to the other side, we should all recognize now the responsibility that we have to make an even greater difference in the world. And I really do believe it. So my advice is fortify yourself for the future.
Thank you so much, Ken. And I know you can't hear them clapping, but I know the audience thanks you as well for everything that you're doing and for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Stay strong, safe, and healthy.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Karen.